There is a low building on South Hillman Avenue in Ontario, California, about 50 miles east of Los Angeles. From the road, it looks like nothing. Pale walls, a flat roof. The kind of building you pass without ever seeing. The kind that blends into the industrial landscape the way a sentence blends into a paragraph. No monument out front, no sculpture, no sign tall enough to stop you. But step through the front doors and the building tells you what it is immediately. The smell arrives first. Cutting oil, warm and metallic, hanging in the cool factory air, then the sound. Not a roar, nothing so dramatic as that. A steady, patient rhythm. The sound of machines turning solid aluminum into shape, one part at a time, the same way they have been turning it for decades. In 1999, this single factory produced 39 million flashlights in 1 year. At its height, the brand built inside these walls accounted for 1 out of every $4 Americans spent on flashlights. Police officers carried it on their belts. Soldiers carried it into the field. It sat in the kitchen drawer of nearly every house in the country. And when the power went out, in that first second of complete darkness, it was the first thing a father's hand reached for. That brand is Maglite. And if you are old enough to remember a flashlight that felt like it had been machined from a single bar of solid metal, heavy, cold, serious in your hand, then you already know exactly what we are talking about. For 30 years, Maglite did not just lead the American flashlight market. It was the empire. And then, in the space of a single decade, that empire came apart. Not because the company shipped its factory to China. Not because a corporate raider bought it and stripped it for parts. Not because the founder walked away. Maglite is still here. The factory on South Hillman Avenue is still running. The founder still walks the floor at 95 years old. And that is what makes this story so strange. Because everything that destroyed Maglite's empire can be held in the palm of your hand. And it cost about $5. If this is the kind of story that matters to you, not just that something was lost, but the exact mechanism of how it happened and who never saw it coming, this channel was built for you. Subscribe before we continue. What happened to Maglite is already happening to American brands you have not even thought about yet. To understand how the empire fell, you first have to understand the man who built it. Because for 50 years, Maglite was never really a company. It was one man's hands. Anthony Maglite was born in New York City in November of 1930, the worst year of the Great Depression. His mother, a Croatian immigrant, took him back to the old country as a boy, to a small island called Zlaren off the Dalmatian coast. He grew up there through the Second World War, through occupation, through the kind of hunger that does not leave a person even after the food comes back. He would say later, plainly and without drama, that he had stood in front of a firing squad as a child, that he had gone barefoot, that he had survived things no child should ever have to survive. He did not say these things to create sympathy. He said them the way a man states facts about weather, because they were simply part of what had happened had made him exactly who he was. In 1950, at 19 years old, he came back to America with almost no English and no money. His first job was piecework in a New York sweatshop, sewing for 50 cents an hour. He drifted west to California, found work as a machinist, and discovered the one thing he was extraordinary at: making metal do exactly what he wanted it to do, to a tolerance finer than a human hair, a tolerance invisible to the naked eye but detectable in the hand, in the way a finished part seat itself perfectly against another finished part, the way two precisely machined surfaces came together without play or wobble or gap. In 1955, he scraped together $125, put it down on a used metal lathe, and opened a one-man machine shop in a Los Angeles garage. For more than 20 years, that is all the company was. Tony Maglite alone, machining precision parts for other people's products, for industry, for aerospace, for the military. He was a subcontractor, the man who made the small, perfect pieces that went inside things with other companies' names stamped on them. The invisible craftsman, the man behind the part, behind the product. Hold on to that detail. The man who would build America's most recognized flashlight spent the first half of his working life making things no one would ever know he had made. The flashlight came almost by accident. Maglite had been machining components for a flashlight manufacturer, and he was not impressed by what he saw. Flashlights in the 1970s were frankly junk, flimsy stamped tin and cheap plastic. The kind of object you purchased already it would fail you, already accepting the disappointment before you had even taken it home. Maglite looked at that and saw something close to an insult. He believed a flashlight should be a tool, a serious one, something a police officer could stake his life on in the dark without a second thought. In 1979, he introduced it, the original Maglite, the body machined from solid aircraft-grade aluminum, hard anodized inside and out so it would never corrode, a focusing beam controlled by twisting the head, sealed against water, and quite deliberately unmistakably heavy, because that weight told you something the moment you picked it up. This was not disposable. This was not the junk drawer flashlight. This was built to last a lifetime, and the weight of it said so before you ever switched it on. There was one more detail that mattered, one that most people who carried a Maglite never knew existed. United States Patent Number 4286311, filed in 1978, protecting the design at its very core. For more than 2 decades, that single patent stood like a wall around the entire company. No one could legally build a Maglite. The wall was invisible. It was also absolute. A wall is a wonderful thing to stand behind. It is also a very easy thing to forget you are depending on. By 1982, the one-man garage was gone. Maglite moved his company into a real factory in Ontario, California, 126,000 square feet with 80 workers. And he ran that factory the same way he had run the lathe in the garage. Everything in-house. Everything machined from raw bar stock on his own floor, by his own people, to his own standard. Walk that factory floor in the 1980s and you would understand the company in an instant. The smell of cutting fluid hanging in the cool air. The steady chatter of dozens of machines running in careful rotation. Long racks of aluminum tubes moving from station to station, cut, bored, threaded, anodized, assembled, inspected. Tony Maglite designed much of the tooling himself. He inspected the products himself. Nothing left that building that he had not, in some essential sense, touched. It was a beautiful way to build a flashlight. Slow, deliberate, controlled from the raw metal, all the way to the finished tool. It produced an object of genuine quality, and the customer could feel it the moment the flashlight was in their hand. Not read about it, not be told about it, feel it, in the weight, in the finish, in the clean mechanical click of the beam focusing from flood to point. But a company built entirely around one man's standard carries a hidden cost. It can only move as fast as that one man can turn. It can only change direction when that one man decides to turn the wheel. For 30 years, that total control was the secret of Maglite's quality. The day the world began moving faster than Tony Maglite, it would become the thing that nearly ended him. For now, though, the world was not moving faster than Tony Maglite. The world was buying everything he could make. In 1984, Maglite released a product that turned a successful company into a household name, the Mini Maglite, a flashlight the size of a fountain pen, running on 2 AA batteries with the same machined aluminum body and the same focusing beam as its full-size brother, shrunk down to slip into a shirt pocket, a glove box, a purse. If you are old enough, you owned one. You know exactly the one. The black anodized finish, cool against your fingers. The faint knurling on the grip. The small satisfying click as you twisted the head and the beam tightened from a wide flood to a sharp white circle. You kept it in the kitchen drawer. Your father kept one in the truck. The Mini Maglite did not just sell. It created a category. Before it, a personal flashlight was barely a product. After it, every hardware store in America had an entire wall of them. By the late 1980s, Maglite was no longer competing in the flashlight market. It was the standard against which everything else was measured. The Wall Street Journal called it the Cadillac of flashlights. When the chief executive of Apple Computer wanted to describe the ambition he had for his own company, he reached for the same comparison. He said he wanted Apple to be the Maglite of computers. Think about that for a moment. A flashlight had become a measure of excellence for one of the most famous technology companies on Earth. Police departments across the country issued Maglites as standard equipment. The long, heavy D-cell model rode in the door pocket of nearly every patrol car in America. In 1999, the factory in Ontario produced 39 million flashlights. The company was worth somewhere in the range of $750 million. And Maglite told you exactly why in the most famous advertisement it ever made. A Maglite is set down in the path of a fully loaded Mack truck. The truck rolls straight over it. The flesh is dug out of the asphalt, switched on, and it works. The tagline said two words, on and on. That promise was the foundation of the entire empire. Maglite was indestructible. Maglite would outlive you. But look closely at that promise, because there is something hidden inside it. Everything Maglite promised you was about the body, the aluminum, the toughness, the shell that survived a truck. Maglite had spent 30 years perfecting the part of the flashlight that holds the light. It had spent almost no time at all thinking about the light itself. That was the first crack, hidden inside 30 years of success, invisible until the moment it mattered. The second crack ran through the family. For more than 20 years, beginning in 1971, Tony Maglite had a partner. Her name was Claire. She worked beside him as the company grew from a garage into an empire, handling the administrative work that allowed Tony to stay on the floor, stay at the machines, stay in control of the product. In 1992, she discovered that Tony had quietly arranged for all of it, every share of the company, to pass to his children from an earlier marriage. When he died, she would receive nothing. Claire sued. In 1994, a California jury awarded her $84 million. At the time, one of the largest verdicts of its kind in the state's history. The case went to appeal. The verdict was overturned. The two sides eventually settled for a smaller, undisclosed figure. But what the lawsuit carved into the company could not be undisclosed or settled. Away Maglite was Tony Maglite's, his to control, his to keep, his to defend in a courtroom if necessary. No outside investors, no board of directors with the authority to challenge him, no shareholders demanding adaptation. For 30 years, that total control had been the secret of the company's integrity. It was about to become the reasons it could not save itself. One decision changed everything. And it did not happen in a boardroom. It did not happen on a factory floor. It happened on a street in Los Angeles in the dark, and it was caught on camera by a news helicopter. On the night of June 23, 2004, Los Angeles police stopped a car theft suspect named Stanley Miller. After Miller had surrendered, an officer struck him 11 times with a long, heavy metal flashlight. The footage played on every television in America, and the flashlight in that officer's hand, the 2-pound aluminum instrument in the footage, was the very object Maglite had spent 25 years making famous. Its toughness, its weight, the strength that had survived a Mack truck. Within weeks, Lapty Chief William Bratton announced the department would move away from the large flashlight entirely. Officers would carry a smaller light, one that could not be swung as a weapon, and the Lapt was the most imitated police force in the country. Where it led, hundreds of departments followed. A waiting list of more than 1,000 agencies formed to evaluate the replacement. The replacement was not a Maglite. Maglite's greatest strength, its indestructible, weaponizable weight, had become a liability the moment it was filmed on the news. The toughness that built the empire became the thing that cracked it open. But losing the police was only the wound. It was not the thing that killed the empire. To understand what actually ended Maglite's empire, you have to look at what was already waiting to walk through the door that the Lapt incident had left standing open. While Maglite had been perfecting aluminum, a completely different revolution had been happening somewhere else, not in a factory, not in a boardroom, but inside the light itself. For 100 years, a flashlight worked one way. Electricity heated a thin wire inside a glass bulb until it glowed. It was the same fundamental technology Thomas Edison had demonstrated in 1879. It was the technologies inside every Maglite ever assembled on the Ontario factory floor. And by the early 2000s, it was becoming obsolete in ways that the industry had been slow to fully believe. In May of 2001, a company called Lumileds introduced something that changed the equation permanently. A power LED, a light-emitting diode, finally bright enough for the first time to genuinely illuminate a room. It used a fraction of the electricity of a glass bulb. It did not burn out. It did not shatter. It would run for tens of thousands of hours without replacement, and it was small, solid state, and getting cheaper every single year. A new kind of company rose up to build flashlights around it. Not in California, not in any American factory. In Shenzhen, China, A firm called Phoenix began selling LED flashlights in 2001. Another called Olight followed in 2007. They were not weighed down by 30 years of habit, or a factory built around machining aluminum, or one founder's lifetime of expertise in a technology that was now quietly dying. They simply built the new thing, and the new thing was not just a little better. It was humiliatingly better. A cheap LED flashlight out of China, sold at a fraction of the price of a Maglite, could be many times brighter, run far longer on the same batteries, and never need its bulb replaced. The gap between the old technology and the new was not a gap. It was a canyon, and Maglite was standing on the wrong side of it, looking across. Then, in March of 2005, the wall came down. United States Patent 4,286,311, the legal barrier that had protected the Maglite design for more than 2 decades, expired. A congressman from Maglite's own district introduced a bill to extend it. The bill failed. And now, at the exact moment a cheaper and fundamentally better technology was pouring in from overseas, anyone in the world was free to build something that looked and worked like a Maglite. The wall that Tony Maglica had stood behind since 1978 was simply gone. This is where the $5 object arrives. As LED technology spread through the market, a small industry appeared selling LED conversion bulbs, designed to drop straight into the existing socket of an old incandescent Maglite. For about $5, you could take out the flashlight already sitting in your kitchen drawer and make it many times brighter with batteries that lasted far longer. You did not need to buy a new Maglite. You did not, in fact, need to buy any flashlight at all. The product you already owned could be upgraded for the price of a fast food lunch. Maglite did respond. It released its own LED models, but not until 2006, 5 full years after Phoenix had started. In a technology race where the leaders were measuring advantages in months, Maglite arrived half a decade late, still carrying a factory built for a different century. And then came from the funnel blow, the one that required no factory at all, the smartphone. By 2010 and into the decade that followed, nearly every adult in America was carrying a flashlight in their pocket every hour of every day. They had not paid 1 extra cent for it. The everyday flashlight, the impulse purchase, the junk drawer mini Maglite that had built the company, an entire product category, simply stopped being something most people needed to buy. Your phone was already brighter, already charged, already in your hand. Now, it would be easy to stand here and say that Tony Maglica should have seen it coming, that he should have moved to LED faster, should have chased the Chinese manufacturers on price, should have read the market and turned the wheel in time. But look honestly at the decision in front of him, and it is not so simple. Maglica had built something real. A factory of American workers machining American aluminum, producing a product good enough to be displayed in design museums in Japan and Germany. To chase the new market on price, he would have had to do what nearly every competitor did: move production to Asia, abandon the factory, abandon the workers. He refused. He said in plain words that he would not go to China and make another country rich while making his own country poor. And to pivot overnight to LED, he would have had to discard 30 years of tooling, 30 years of expertise, the entire vertically integrated identity of the company. On a spreadsheet, the right answer was obvious: move offshore, cut the workforce, chase the cheap light. Every number pointed that direction, but a spreadsheet cannot measure what Tony Maglica was actually protecting. It cannot weigh 36 years of one machinist's working life. It cannot calculate the cost of a promise made to a workforce, to a town, to a country. Maglica looked at the cheap, fast, offshore answer, and he decided that saving the margin was not worth becoming the kind of company he had spent his whole life refusing to be. He may have lost the empire, but he was not willing to lose that. To see the road Maglite did not take, you only have to look a little further down the California coast. In 1979, the very same year Tony Maglica introduced the original Maglite, another flashlight company was founded in California. It was called Surefire. It would go on to face exactly the same LED revolution, the same flood of cheap competitors, the same old technology collapsing underneath it. Surefire made a different choice. It never tried to be the flashlight in everyone's kitchen drawer. It went the opposite direction entirely, building the most advanced tactical, Lights in the world, embracing section the new lighting technology early, instead of late, binding itself to the customers who would always pay for the absolute best. Elite military units, federal agents, special operations forces who needed a light they would stake their lives on in actual darkness. Sure, fire did not have 100 years of incandescent technology to defend. It treated the new light as an opportunity. Maglite treated it as a threat. Same year, same industry, completely different outcome. Maglite is still here. That is the part that surprises people. The factory on South Hellman Avenue in Ontario is still running. It still machines every flashlight from solid aluminum. It still employs around 800 American workers, far fewer than the 2,400 once planned for the expansion facility that was built and never filled. But 800 real jobs in a real American factory are still there. Tony Maglica is still there too. At 95 years old, he still comes in to work. He still inspects the products. Nothing new ships without his approval. Beside him now, his son Anthony Maglica Jr. is slowly taking up the work. The first real sign that the company is preparing for a morning its founder will not see. In January of 2025, when the Palisades fire swept through the neighborhoods west of Los Angeles, a man named Andrew Ginsfelder stayed through the night, running a generator to protect his home from the flames. He lit the darkness around him with a Maglite. The company shared his story like it was a small moment, but it was exactly the moment the flashlight was always built for. The emergency, the outage, the night when the power fails and you need the one thing that refuses to quit. Maglite did not die, but the empire did. The brand that once held 1 out of every 4 flashlights in America is now one name among hundreds, most of them brighter, most of them cheaper, most of them made somewhere else. So stand for a moment outside that low building on South Hellman Avenue. Close your eyes. It is 1995. The air smells of cutting oil. Inside, hundreds of machines are turning in steady rotation, and 39 million flashlights a year are flowing out the doors to every hardware store, and every squad car, and every kitchen drawer in the country, and every single one of them is the answer, the only serious answer. The flashlight America reaches for in the dark. Now open your eyes. The factory is still standing. The lights are still on. The old man is still inside, still working, still inspecting, still refusing to let go of the thing he built with his own 2 hands from a firing squad in a sweatshop and a used metal lathe in a Los Angeles garage. The flashlight in your pocket right now, the one that is brighter than anything he ever made, does not have his name on it. It is your phone, and he is still in there, still at the machines, still checking every part that leaves that building. Some men build empires, some men outlive them, and some men, the rare ones, refuse to leave even after the empire is gone, because the work was never really about the empire. It was about the thing itself, the object, the standard, the light that refused to quit. Tony Maglica never quit either.